Oh, that's great. That is absolutely fine. We encourage, Arena, we encourage everyone to, we're grateful when the agency directors are able to make time to come. It's helpful if we're all on the same page. Makes life easier, particularly for the liaison. Okay, and then I want to start our AI notes so that you have that as well. Okay. So let me minimize you and stop me so that you're focused where I need you to focus, and that's on this. Okay. So everyone, as you can see in front of you, Safe and Together Models framework is designed to provide a shared language and approach that we can use in our work to support child welfare and domestic violence professionals in getting better outcomes for families. It's a domestic violence informed practice. Actually, it's more than that. It's a domestic violence responsive practice that facilitates more effective and more efficient processes and collaboration around making the responsibility of the perpetrator as parent central to changing practice. And I want to say that again, the model focuses on making central to changing practice a focus on the perpetrator as parent and that perpetrator's responsibility for the safety, the stability, the well-being of the family. This in turn touches on a wide range of issues, which includes, as we talked about yesterday, gender double standards, and often egregious gaps in practice with fathers. The model's principles, which you see here, guide the practice. When working with victims or perpetrators, we should always be asking ourselves, are we keeping outcomes of women and children at the center of our practice? Are we keeping the goals of child safety, well-being, stability, and nurturance at the center of our practice? While the first principle is tied to keeping children safe and together with the adult survivor, it's also relevant to setting goals with the perpetrator. What is he expected to do to increase children's physical and emotional safety? What is he expected to do to facilitate their healing from trauma? What is he expected to do to provide a stable and nurturing environment for them? If we consider safety, well-being, nurturance, and stability as anchors, that first principle invites us to consider what perpetrators have done to harm these things, and what are they going to be expected to do to make those things better? For survivors, we consider what they did to support these important anchors, right? What were their strengths? What protective behaviors did they engage in to make these things better? And what are we going to do to support them to build on those strengths based on what they as survivors can actually control? The second principle asks us, how are we connecting the work with or information about perpetrators to our work with the adult survivor, right? How are we partnering with the non-offending parent? This is tied to specific practices such as learning more about her hopes and her fears for the relationship, her specific concerns about safety, changes she'd like to see the perpetrator make, and the continuous assessment of the impact of domestic violence on her and her children. The third principle, intervening with the perpetrator to reduce risk and harm to the child, this explores the question of how we're engaging in a wide range of practices related to intervening with perpetrators as parents. This practice includes identifying parent behaviors and the impact of those behaviors on child and family functioning. This principle looks at violence, perpetrating abuse, perpetrating controlling, coercive behaviors as a parenting choice. And it focuses on interventions with perpetrators as parents that would improve child and family functioning rather than just sending him to a program, right? I believe that, we all know well that domestic violence is identified and defined by the behavior of the perpetrator. And that behavior almost always involves coercive control. And though it may be targeted at the adult survivor, it impacts children too, either directly or indirectly. In child welfare, the focus of domestic violence cases has often been on the survivor, right? On her behavior, her decisions. In the safe and together approach, the perpetrator and his behaviors become invisible. Not in the safe and together approach. In the old approach, the perpetrator and the way that we have done it traditionally, historically, the perpetrator and his behaviors are invisible. We ignore the perpetrator as a parent, and we hold the survivor responsible for the perpetrator's choices and the perpetrator's behavior. And when we do that, what historically has happened in child welfare? What happens is a failure to protect approach is taken to cases involving domestic violence in children. A failure to protect approach to domestic violence means the emphasis is on the adult survivor's decision-making rather than on the perpetrator's behavior. Many people consider that approach, that failure to protect approach, as a component of domestic violence destructive practice. When we take a failure to a protect approach, and I want to open us up now for just a little bit of conversation around this. Sorry, when we take this approach, what happens? Why is this practice destructive? You can turn on your cameras now and just share a little bit about that. Oops. Why is that destructive? Why is focusing on the survivor, right, and her behavior, and making the perpetrator and his behavior invisible? Why is sort of looking at a case involving domestic violence as a mother's failure to protect her children a destructive approach? Why would we say that? What happens? I know you've had experience with that.
It's destructive because you're re-traumatizing the person that has no control over the behavior of the other person. You're having them be accountable for something they can't control that's happening to them as well as their children. And with the threat of you're going to lose your children if you can't make these things happen, without there being any accountability at all for the person who's actually perpetrating the abuse.
Right. 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 Oh, I don't have your oh, sorry. Jody, sorry. I don't know why it said that. I haven't locked anybody's camera. So my apologies, everyone. Is anyone else having trouble with their camera? Okay. Thank you, Nikki. Any other thoughts around that? What you've seen happen to families that are at that intersection of child welfare and domestic violence, when mom's being held accountable for everything that's happening and the perpetrator is kind of not in the picture, other than, yeah, he's bad and you need to keep him out. So, and what are you going to do now to keep everybody safe and stable? And has that been your experience? Have you had something different? Anyone? Hello, is everybody there?
So I think that for me, the thing that I've seen with the failure to protect mindset is that our families are left with no other resource. I mean, it's, you have to do whatever needs to happen. So then they might end up coming into shelter. Well, then that's further traumatizing everybody because they're just no real plan put in to keep them safe. What am I supposed to do? So I don't like that thought pattern at all.
Right. That's right. That's right. It is important child safety comes first, and that's across the board. It's really, really important. But what liaisons have to help child welfare professionals understand is that if I'm a victim too, right? There are a lot of things that I am doing that you're not even asking me about, right? That I am doing and I am actively engaged in to try to keep myself and my kid, to keep myself safer and to keep my kids safe. But you're not asking me about that. You're blaming me, and I feel it, right? You're here. And clearly as we talked about yesterday, I failed. Because if I hadn't failed, you wouldn't be here. And the reason that I feel that way is because of the way I'm being approached, right? Why have you let this? Why do you stay? Why haven't you? It's my fault. It's framed. Even if we say it, even if the professional is saying it nicely, right? We read between those lines, right? You're here and you're looking at me, and I don't see you saying anything about him other than you need to keep him away, and not even sort of figuring out from me or learning from me about how hard that might be, assuming that that's what I really want to do, right? Which it may not be for a number of different reasons, but you don't know that because you haven't asked. So, yeah, exactly. So let me get you back up here. Make sure I've got the right. Is everybody seeing the screen? Okay. Okay. All right, good. Well, I'm just going to leave camera on. Okay. So what happens a lot of times in child welfare is that the assumption is that the survivor is choosing to endanger her children by remaining with the perpetrator, right? And as I just said, we tend to overlook the strategy she's using, that she has been using to keep her children safe. We focus on what she's not doing, such as moving out, rather than on identifying her strengths. We remove responsibility from the perpetrator as a parent. And when we do that, we impede achievement of our goal to improve child safety and family functioning. Can everyone see the next slide? Okay. All right, good. So this is another really important component of the Safe and Together model. The multiple pathways to harm helps us. We're going to look at it in depth today, but I wanted to sort of really talk about it now because this model helps us to really unwind gender bias that's in our system by recognizing that violent fathers are responsible for issues that are often blamed on the mother. It also helps us to provide a better context for understanding her protective efforts, a better understanding of how hard she needs to work, for example, to get the kids, just to get them to school or just to get them up and dressed. Using the multiple pathways to harm appropriately, understanding how the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control towards the adult the adult survivor, and the actions that he has taken to harm the children, how that impacts the children's sense of safety, how it traumatized them as a victim of physical abuse, or as someone who has seen or heard about the violence being perpetrated in their home against other members of their family, against their mother. It also has a direct impact on on family ecology, right? A lot of times we see in homes where there's domestic violence, many times the abuser isn't employed, right? There's a loss of income. And if they leave, if we make them leave, they are employees and we make them leave, there's a loss of income to the family itself, right? Which mom is left trying to figure out, how am I going to make that work without engaging him? And she's left to figure that out on her own a lot of times. There's housing instability. A lot of times we see with vulnerable families who are at the intersection of child welfare and domestic violence that they're many times they're homeless, or they've moved from place to place. They've been evicted because of DV issues. There's a loss of contact for survivors with their extended family. A lot of times bridges get burned because they're like, you need to leave. He's bad. You don't need to, I can't talk to you about this because you need to leave, right? There are educational and social disruptions with every move. With that instability, the kids may have been to more than one school, or they may have been out of school for a while. And so that causes harm to the child. With such instability in the home, with such trauma occurring in the home, the child suffers from a behavioral, emotional, social, and educational perspective. Developmentally, they may experience delays. They may also, if they're being physically abused, experience physical injury. And his pattern of coercive, abusive control also has an effect on his partner's ability to parent, right? His choice of abuse is his choice of abuse as a parenting, an approach to parenting, because that's what it is, results in his partner's, it impairs his partner's ability to parent. Because quite often we see that survivors of domestic violence, victims who are in a domestic violence relationship, are depressed, they suffer from PTSD, they have anxiety, they abuse substances in order to to reduce that sense of stress, that their anxiety, to self-medicate, right? The depression and anxiety. They have a loss of authority. Their energy goes to addressing the perpetrator instead of the children, right? He undermines everything that they say or do. He demeans her, in front of the children. And so they don't listen to her. A lot of times we have survivors who come to our safe homes and their children are just like, oh my goodness, they're out of control, right? Well, that's because they've been in chaos too, right? Their lives have been chaotic. And they don't listen to her because in that abusive relationship, they were taught not to, that what she said didn't matter. And of course, this then interferes with her day-to-day routine and her basic care, her ability to parent effectively. The fact that she's able to continue to do anything at all to try to keep herself safe and to help her children have some sense of routine or normalcy, in whatever way that manifests in that relationship, is a testament to her resilience in the relationship. Go deeper into this model, this framework shortly, but before we do that, I want to talk about just a few more things. So what I'd like for you to do is take the note. There's a case note that you have. And let me just close our thing, stop sharing. Has everyone gotten the case consultation note?
Yes.
So what I would like for you to do, it is 11:25. It takes about, depending on how fast a reader you are, 10 or 15 minutes to read that. What I'd like for you to do is we're going to take a little bit of an early break so that you can review that case note. And I'm going to put you into breakout rooms. You can review that note. You can leave your camera off, or, when you get into the breakout room, sort of reach agreement within your breakout room, 10 minutes, whatever, to read the note. And then I'd like for you to take I want to spend 30 minutes on this. So how much time you spend on the note versus how much time you spend talking about it, right, is something I'm going to let you as a group decide. But you will notice at the end of the note that there are questions. And I'm going to divide you up into 5 groups, and you'll have the first 3 groups will have 3 questions, and the last 2 groups will have 2 questions. I want you to discuss those questions, and then we're going to come back together and we're going to talk about it in terms of how of how the way that note was organized sort of reflects the critical components of the Safe and Together model. So if you will give me a moment, and I'm going to stop our pause back in. So what did you think about the note? Group
Rachel
one,
had-
why not?
Oh.
Let's start with the questions. Well, first, I mean, I want to do both things. I want to get just your overall impression of sort of the note, and then we're going to look at the questions for each group. Okay. So just overall for the note itself, your thoughts around that.
I loved it. I felt like it gave more of an overall whole family picture of the abuse. And I super appreciated that. That it was very awesome.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very detailed in with each child, what was going on and what was happening with his behaviors, that she had already accessed everything that she could. It was very detailed.
What else did you notice about the note?
It was directed more, it was focused more on his behavior and what he was willing to do than trying to throw everything back on mom for stuff that she can't control.
Yeah, I agree with that. It had more of a supportive feel to it because it also addressed her strengths. So I appreciated that too, Nikki.
Mm-hmm.
I also like that it talks about like the continual abuse even after like leaving that relationship. You know, it's not just leaving the relationship and it ends. Like he continues to try to control her. And I kind of like that shows that like even when you leave a relationship, like the abuse doesn't stop it there.
Mm-hmm.
It didn't seem like it was a one and done either. It seemed like it had been like an ongoing note where they had met with everybody, spent time with everybody, and then compiled all that information.
Mm-hmm. So let's start group one. Did you get to your questions?
We did. We powered through them at the end.
Okay.
Yeah, so what we liked about this note is that you can tell it was very detailed and it was not just from like a 15-minute one-time phone conversation, if that makes sense. It was felt very much more of like a good family, like psychosocial assessment and like putting those pieces together. You kind of got insights of how like this affected the mom and like how maybe that like and how that trickles down to the kids and how they're reacting both very differently from the trauma. And then also like what the dad is doing, you know, like what services have been implemented, and like probably insight from like the DCS worker, how like visits are still going on and how that's affecting that dynamic. I really like that about the note.
And group, thank you. That was both of your questions?
That was one of them.
Okay. Did you get you had?
Yeah, and then what does the note tell you about how the assessment was made? Like again, like it was like in different parts, and again, like really rounded. You kind of got parts from everybody that's playing in that circle. And then what do you notice about how its use of coercive control and actions taken to harm the child as a framework for understanding domestic abuse? We kind of talked about how the child, like Harmony, the teenager, how she kind of showed and portrayed the trauma of being in that relationship, how she tried to like isolate herself, like she tried to remove herself from the situation. She's living with another family member, but she's still maybe like using and abusing drugs and alcohol, and how like maybe girls and boys and women and men like portray trauma differently, you know, like she's internalizing it all. And then Jesse is just like is kind of aggressive, right? He's having behavior control, like he's having impulse control issues and behaviors, and then like issues at school as well. And so we kind of talked about that, how like he's not like a bad kid by any means, like he's just traumatized. And so like and how girls and boys sometimes show that differently.
Yeah. Thank you. How about the second set of questions?
Miranda, that's us. Are you going to talk for us?
I can, yes. So the first question, what did you notice about how it tied this pattern to child and family functioning? We basically just said that we liked mostly how it identified how it affects them individually and as a unit, and not just in one aspect. It talked about financially, the younger kid couldn't sleep, so it was affecting his schooling, just things kind of like that. Do you want to do the next one or you want me to?
And then you go ahead.
Okay. What kind of interviews would produce this type of information? Like it was said before, it was it just kind of seemed like it was over a long period of time and not just one type. And it seemed like it was separate interviews, and it seemed very detailed. And then what would change if domestic violence documentation was organized this way? We said that it would focus on people's strengths and where they could go from their situation, and not just focus on what had happened to them.
Yeah, with respect to that, it is one of the things that I strongly encouraged at RAT was writing at least an initial note that sort of was organized in this way, that sort of there are times when we get subpoenaed, right, to produce, and we may be able to manage just to have the judge view it rather than having it all come out in court. But how powerful would it be to set the stage for what's in a survivor's file than by presenting sort of what has happened in this way? So it's not just something that is a best practice in child welfare, but it is also a good practice, right? A best practice in DV, right? Because we're not just saying he was abusive or she was in a domestic violence relationship, which is vague and broad and doesn't tell anybody anything, right? This provides sort of the behaviorally what was he doing, and it clearly puts responsibility, right? It balances that, it eliminates that gender bias, right? It puts responsibility for the abuse on the abuser, and it doesn't do it in vague generic terms. It's very specific. It talks about specific behaviors. What exactly did he abused her? How? What did he do? Right? The more specific and explicit that you can be in terms of behaviorally how he is abusing her, the better it is for her. If she's writing an order of protection, having that information available to her to put in, these are the specific things that he did, sort of helping a survivor with it. They've been traumatized. Words a lot of times don't come easily. It's hard to tell people about all the stuff that's happened. If we can witness that for them, right? Be that witness, hear what their story, and then ask the questions we need to ask you, get those specific behavioral descriptions of what he actually did and to what extent. These things are very specific and in many cases measurable, right? They've got numbers. 40 times he did this, he did that. Very specific behavioral descriptions. That helps in so many ways. And then we've identified similarly what her strengths are, right? What she did, what protective behavior she engaged in, right? What promotive behavior she's engaging in now, right? In order to help her and her children move forward. Those are just so, they're just really, really important. So those of you who are sort of there, people are like, it takes time. Yeah, it takes a minute to do that. It does. But it is time well invested if we're there, if our purpose is to do what we say we're there to do, right? Why would you do less? That's what I can never wrap my head or heart around. If we're there and what we want to do is to really sort of lift survivors up, to help them heal and move forward, why would we not invest the time and effort needed at the front end to make that easier for them on down the road as they move forward? Right? So and that's true in terms of liaisons and coaching that. It's just a really important, yes, it takes time, but it saves so much more in terms of time and effort and trauma, right, to families. If you just take that time, make that time, because most of the times we have to make it, right? It's not just going to present itself. We have to schedule it, make it, this time is this. I'm not spending less than this. A minimum, I'm going to take 2 hours or 3 hours to meet with this family and members of this family and gather this information and to really process this in a way that, you know, I'm going to ask the right questions to get the information I need to be able to document this appropriately for this family, because they deserve at least this. At least this. And they need to have a copy of it. Both of them. The perpetrator and the survivor. Sorry, that's just my little, I feel very strongly about this for both systems, right? It's not enough to do good, to be out there helping, right? That help, because we see what happens. We help and people still get lost in systems. It's helping effectively, understanding what that looks like. The next set of questions, the third set of questions.
That's us. What did you notice about the case planning? Overall, just again, it was very detailed, didn't leave out anything. I like that it redirected him a lot back to his own behaviors, like his denial, recognized that his denial, like, I'm not the problem, she is, kind of pushing the blame, him just being so defensive, controlling, but it focused on dad's extensive issues and problems that are going on with this. But also I love that it was focusing on, or looked at mom's strengths a lot. Just that she was, even though everything that she's going through, she's able to still prepare meals or reach out, like, hey, I can think clearly enough to, dad's in a mood, I'm going to send kids to the neighbors, that kind of thing. So yeah. Anything
Yeah, those
else?
are, yeah, thank you. Yeah, those are things that, I mean, when they tell us, right, we've just let those go past, you know, those get lost.
Right.
Those little really important details get lost in our documentation. We're not recognizing them as the strength and documenting them as the strengths that they are.
Mhm.
And that's just really important. I mean, you know, when you think about this is a, again, we're really focusing on men, right? And there's a reason for that. Most of us already know the reason for that. Most perpetrators of abusive, coercive control are male, right?
Mhm.
And so whenever we are documenting what's happened in a domestic violence relationship that intersects with child welfare, it is really important understanding historically how child welfare systems have perceived, right, these types of situations, these types of relationships, and how historically women have been the focus. This way of approaching the situation, approaching the relationship, allows us now, it makes the invisible visible, and it puts it front and center. His abuse. You're here not because of her, you're here because of him, and because of choices he made and the impact they had on this family, period. End of story.
They could have easily looked back to mom's drinking and that been a huge focus.
Which happens,
Right.
right? You need to get him out of the house. You need to get cleaned up. You need to do this. You need to do that. You need to do the other thing. And yes, does she need to do those things? She does.
Yes.
But that becomes the problem is those become the focus,
Right.
right? And he is just not even there. The purpose, the perpetrator, the person who is responsible for us all being here sitting around this table trying to figure out a plan is not even 9 times out of 10 in the room.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not okay. And so it's really, really, really important. I mean, that this note, and I'm going to jump ahead of us here. I want to make sure, because I just feel so strongly about all this. The bias that we have seen, the focus on sort of mom's dysfunction, mom's failure to do the things that mom needs to do in order to keep the children safe, totally ignoring the fact that the reason mom is probably struggling, the reason mom is probably abusing substances, the reason mom struggles to pull herself up out of bed in the morning, the reason mom is neglecting her children's needs is because mom is spending so much time trying to keep dad, from blowing up and wreaking havoc on everybody instead of just her. And that has to change. And that's part of why you're here, is to help affect that change in a trauma-informed way, right? Not by going in and saying, hey, you guys need to stop this. It's not right. No, but recognizing, people are, I don't know what I don't know, right? I don't know that I think I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm doing good. I'm protecting children. Right? Who are you to come in and tell me, to accuse me or blame me, right, for doing my job, right? That's not what we should be doing, but rather introducing and, increasing awareness that, hey, where's he at in all this? Isn't he the one that sort of the catalyst for everything else that happened, right? Don't we need to bring him in and put him over here right in the middle of this and start there and look at what he has done, how that has impacted everything else, right? So it's that bringing awareness to the fact that without even being aware that that's what we were doing, we are really, really biased against mom. It's her fault. Mary, you're going to say something?
Well, and just the recommendation part of it was just saying that he doesn't have any insight into what is going on. So actually being able to, like, not for lack of better words, call him on it. Like, what do you see your role as? What do you see, when you're trying to just engage him, do you recognize your behaviors? Are you aware that you're doing this?
Right, because just in the way that if we're involved in, and again, let me just say, because as DV professionals, we're not doing this either, right? We don't document like this either. Just like we're not aware that and we may find ourselves talking about mom's issues, right, in our notes, rather than talking about what's happening to mom from the frame of how what he did has impacted her, right? We're doing the same thing in a different way. So in the same way that we have not been aware, we lack that self-awareness of how we're actually contributing to the bias. He lacks awareness of how he's contributing, how he is perpetrating, right, dysfunction in the family, his abuse, and that his abuse is a choice. He's choosing to do that. And his choices are impacting his entire family. He's not seeing that.
And help him understand that.
That's right. Help him to help bring that awareness to him.
Right.
Right. So through the questions that we ask.
And I like that.
Yeah,
Oh,
go
I'm
ahead.
sorry. I like that she kept bringing it back to him. When he would try to put it off on her, they would bring it back to him. And like she said, call him out on his behavior. And even though she had problems and she did she drank and did whatever to cope. They recognize that, and even in the note before the recommendations talked about, she's already reached out to all of the resources that she can to try to fix this on her own.
Yeah.
And so here we are, and this is what we're going to focus on, the problem ourselves, and we're going to tell Dad what we need to be doing. And I like that.
Yeah. Her one poor coping skill is drinking. However,
Yeah.
look at all the great things that she is doing. She's aware of the drinking. She's not in denial about it. She's
Right.
going to AA.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, recognizing it is the number one. So,
Well, and recognizing the fact that she is taking those steps
Right.
suggests too, which I think was missing there, suggests to her recognition that what I do will maybe help influence my daughter,
right.
who
that's
is
a good point.
following me, right? She
Mhm.
is self-medicating in the same way I did.
Right.
And
And just
so,
for even Dad to see, like, hey, do you not recognize that she's having to cope with alcohol because of your calling and everything, every little thing that you're doing? So, yeah, being so controlling. So,
so let me ask you a little bit about, what if he's not there, right? What if he's not around for you to include? I mean, that happens, actually, it used to happen. I don't know about now, but it used to be a real problem getting the perpetrator of abuse to show up. I mean, assuming they even wanted to get him to show up, because a lot of times they didn't. So what if he's taken off? Or maybe he's in jail. Maybe they caught him and he's in jail.
The focus goes
then?
back to Mom and what she needs to do to.
But should it?
No, it shouldn't. But that is what happens a lot of the time.
But as a liaison, what will you, and that is what happens. But it's what happens a lot of times anyway. So, that's pretty consistent. That's why Mom usually gets, because it's easy. Mom's here. I got Mom. Right? I can work with Mom. She's right here.
we still reach out to Dad as much as possible. And whether he's in jail, you try to include him. I feel like you have to do everything in your power to reach out to all involved parties until you give up from.
But does that mean you don't document what behaviors were? You don't document in the plan what the expectations are if Dad gets back involved, right? He may not
You
be
do
present
document
now.
it.
Right. You still document.
Yeah.
Everything that's in there would still be there.
Right. If you don't document it, it didn't happen.
That's right. Which is another issue, right? His failure to appear, his failure to be involved,
right,
is another abusive behavior, another choice that he makes. I mean, unless he's in jail, he's kind of locked up, right? But even
he
in
still
jail,
has a choice to engage.
That's right.
I mean, we can go to jail. We can have conversations.
That's right. But just because a parent is in jail does not mean we do not involve that parent in the planning process, right? If I'm in child welfare, nor does it mean that I can't hold that perpetrator accountable. You're going to get out at some point, right? If you're being locked up because of, you're going to get out at some point. You get benefit. You may be sort of entitled to benefits of some sort that may be able to be diverted to your children since you're in jail and can't collect them. Right. Whatever there is that we can put in place to hold you accountable for what you've done, for the dysfunction you've caused to your family, the harm you have caused to your family, we're going to do that.
And what if Dad does start recognizing it? Dad is like, oh, I now see that my behaviors are causing this. Why am I so controlling? And why, like, maybe recognizing him, maybe he needs to go to therapy and like he can recognize what his own faults are.
And we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about sort of that focus on Dad and putting him central, because I mean, those of us in DV know that a lot of times survivors don't want to leave because dad, he was abused as a child. That's why he
Yeah.
does this. He doesn't want to. He needs help.
Right.
I mean, if
All
he
he
had
knows.
cancer, and he was, struggling with cancer, I wouldn't leave him. I would be there with him and help him. And this is the spiritual sickness he's having. And how can I leave him? I promised to be with him in sickness and in health. And he's sick. He needs help. I don't want leaving him will just hurt him more. I don't want to hurt him. I don't want to file an order of protection, and cause him to have to go to jail. That hurts him. I'm not going to do that. Right? So being able to address from the survivor's perspective, her concern, but also not helping her to understand, yes, he is traumatized. Yes, he needs treatment. Yes, he does. But the fact that he is traumatized does not in any way excuse the choices he has made as an adult. And that's a message for a survivor, and a message. Our trauma histories are not a reason for us. I mean, it may help people understand why we do what we do, but when we choose to do bad things, it's still a choice that we make. And that's not okay. Just because you are suffering doesn't give you the right then to cause suffering to other people. That's not okay. Instead, you could choose to get help.
Right.
Right? You didn't choose that. You chose to hurt instead. And so it's possible to those are the types of things that we, in talking about dad's treatment needs, to make sure we're not letting dad or anybody else, the survivor or dad's lawyer, use treatment, right? His need for treatment, his trauma history, as an excuse for his abuse. Because it's not an excuse. It may be an explanation, but it is not an excuse. Okay. So we have to be careful about that. How would this situation be complicated if this survivor was undocumented? From a child welfare perspective.
I think it would be trying to learn how DCS treats people who are undocumented in situations. That would just be my first go-to, is learning what nuances there are when they come to that. And then also like what resources and services are available to them without any documentation, because they might not have insurance. So like that might, make it harder to get them counseling and receive other services. And job possibilities, sometimes DCS wants copies of like a job application and paycheck and pay stub, and what does housing look like too when you don't have any documentation.
Yeah.
Also, I was thinking that sometimes the DCS worker may not realize what the options are for the undocumented survivor as far as what services could possibly be available to assist.
Elizabeth, that is highly likely, and there may not be services depending on, I mean, in some of our more remote counties, right, rural remote counties, there aren't a whole lot of service options available. Certainly not formal service options, and the only informal ones are usually via churches. How would this look different if this was this couple were homosexual? If they were an LGBTQ couple?
Maybe just working against like whatever biases maybe DCS has about it, or any other discriminations. But you would still try to find the non-offending parent and the offending parent.
Yeah.
I agree. It might be having to change some of their mindsets about whether the abuse is as serious as it really is, or just, yeah, changing those biases. I agree.
I'm trying to think of what if there was what if how would this would how would this be complicated or changed in any way, or would it if he were very well known in the community and sort of the community darling and from a higher level, sort of a higher socioeconomic group then, and she was not. She was poor, from a poor background, different place. What would be different? Would anything be different here?
We've had situations while working at the domestic violence shelter where the abuser actually was really well known and even known to the DCS worker. And it did, and the judge, and it did impact the outcomes.
Yeah, I know of one like that too. Mhm. How would and it, I mean, it is having, and so let me just say, the focus is on safety of the children from a child welfare perspective. Child welfare failed miserably because these children have suffered pretty badly. Yeah. So I want to bring us back then. Thank you all for your sort of thoughtful look at that note. And I want to take us back now to the multiple pathways to harm screen here. And this framework that sort of we've been talking about this morning gives us another way to look at how those first and second critical components that we talked about earlier today, the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control and the actions that the perpetrator takes to harm the child, tie in with that fourth critical component, which is the adverse impact of that perpetrator's pattern of behavior on the child, right? The harm to the child. It also provides us with a broader context within which we can better understand survivor strengths, right? If you don't have the picture of just how dysfunctional the family ecology has been as a result of his behavior, if you don't have a sense of how the children's safety has been compromised, threatened because of his pattern of abuse, how they've been traumatized by that. Both the children and the mom have been traumatized by his coercive, controlling, abusive pattern of behavior. If you're not aware of how that has impacted the child's functioning at school, or the mom's ability to parent, how can you talk about mom's strengths? How do her strengths in that kind of environment rise to the surface? The things that she is able to do given that trauma, given that dysfunction, right? That she's met anything that she can do to help maintain some sense of normalcy is a strength. That she can get up in the morning out of bed is a strength. If we don't have a clear understanding of what he did, how it impacted child and family functioning, then it's just not possible for us to accurately assess her efforts to keep her children safe, to help them heal from trauma, and to the best of her ability, to provide some stability and nurturance, right? Those anchors that are absolutely needed as we learn from that first principle of the safe and together model to keep children safe and together with their non-offending parent, right? Those anchors, safety, stability, nurturance, are just really critical to our being able to keep those children safe at home with the non-offending parent. They're also really important for us being able to, as I just explained, assess her strengths, the adult's strengths in this process. It helps us to understand the intersections and intersectionalities as well, sort of what happens if, let's say, there's a mental health issue, right? How does that change how we are assessing what's going on in the family and what steps need to be taken? If mom's suffering from depression and anxiety, right? Without that focus on the perpetrator's pattern of coercive control, what do we say? That becomes her substance use, her mental health issue, the fact she's depressed or anxious, those take center stage. Oh, look at mom, dad's over here, he's got a job, mom's over here, she's going to see a psychiatrist because she, it's crazy half the time. I mean, she drinks too much, she's having to go to AA for that. All of those strengths, all of those promotive behaviors she's engaging in to heal from the trauma he has perpetrated get ignored. Instead, they become problems. They are seen as issues that should result in her children being removed from her, not promotive behaviors she is engaging in an effort to heal from the trauma he caused. Our use of this framework helps us to reinforce high standards for men as parents. They have a responsibility, just as much responsibility for the safety, the stability, and the well-being of nurturance of their family as mom does. And this brings those expectations right up there with those we have for mom. I mean, think about it, guys. In our culture, when you're thinking about, so who's responsible for taking care of the kids when they're sick?
Mom.
Mostly mom, yeah, right? Who goes to, if there's a parent-teacher meeting, who's the one who goes to that? Who's the one who takes them to doctor's appointments, right? Who's the one who makes sure that they've got the, if they need clothes to start school, or they need to get notebooks, or they need to get pencils, or whatever it is that the child needs in order to do the things that the child is expected to do by the systems in the child's life, right? That's mom. Usually that's mom. I mean, we see it changing a little bit, I think, with Gen Z and the Alpha generation, but for the most part, still socioculturally, you think about those things, you think that's mom. That's mom's job. Why didn't mom do that? First thing that pops into our head is not, well, where was dad when all this was going on? First thing that comes into our head is, why did mom let this happen? Where was mom? This framework puts the perpetrator, which again is 90% of the time dad, front and center. All of these things have been impacted. All of these dysfunctional behaviors happening in the home are happening because of choices he made. It is a much more comprehensive way to think about domestic abuse and children, and it increases accountability for perpetrator parents in a way that we have not ever really seen, because it enables us to tell a more comprehensive story of how the domestic violence perpetrators' actions and behaviors impact child and family functioning. The negative effects of, the multiple pathways to harm framework also helps us keep focused on a broader understanding of the impact of the perpetrator's abusive pattern of coercive control on child and family functioning, rather than just on safety, right? Because what do we tend to focus on? How many people in here have been with child welfare, right? The focus is safety first, right? Child safety, and safety first and foremost, for sure, but not only, right? And quite often that's what we see. It's safety first and foremost and only. No, it's more than that. It's safety, stability, well-being, which for a child means they're being nurtured. They have caring, consistent adults in their lives, at least one, because we know that that helps to mitigate the effects of adversity and promote resilience. The framework provides us with a clear understanding of what he did and how it impacted the children in the home, the other parent, so that we can accurately assess the other parents, the non-offending parents' efforts to keep herself and her children safe and together. Her efforts to help them heal, and her efforts to provide stability. We can only understand fully the negative effects on the child and on family functioning if we understand fully what the coercive control and actions were taken, what behaviors he engaged in to harmed the child. And harming the child is not just direct physical abuse. We know that, right? It's what the child has witnessed. That's what the adverse childhood experiences tell us. It's the environment that they're in. It's what they see and hear. And so we can't just focus on physical safety. We have to be concerned with psychological, emotional, environmental safety as well for the child, which means we're looking at things. How stable are they? Are they moving from place to place to place because this man, they keep getting a victim because he's screaming and yelling and knocking holes in things? And they're being asked to leave? Or they're leaving because he keeps losing his jobs and they have to move somewhere else? And that has a negative impact on the child's ability to learn, to maintain connections, to get the support that the child needs to thrive. So we look big picture. It impacts mom's ability to support the child, to be that present, caring, consistent parent for the child, because she is being beaten down and undermined by him. So let's look a little more deeply at that perpetrator pattern of approach. This approach, as we've just said, it looks at that perpetrator's behavior, not the relationship, not the survivor behavior, as the source of risk to the child, the source of safety concerns. It's not mom's substance abuse. It's not mom's mental health issues. It's dad's perpetration of coercive, controlling, abusive behavior. It also goes beyond the current relationship. It takes it does a 360-degree assessment of the perpetrator's pattern. What do you think that means? What does taking that 360-degree, what does it mean to take a 360-degree look at a perpetrator's pattern of coercive, controlling, abusive behavior? Somebody mentioned this the other day when we were talking about, you know, when women are arrested, right? Primary aggressor show up because law enforcement is just looking at what's happening now and not doing what? Does anybody remember?
We're not taking a look at the history of that family. We're looking at this specific incident and how it relates to what's going on right now, as opposed to dad's behavior, dad's issue, and how that impacts everything.
That's right. It's looking back, right? Has he had, so it's looking at his arrest records. Has he been arrested for domestic? Have there been charges filed against him before? Have there been complaints about his behavior before? Has he been arrested for this with somebody else? Right? Nobody looks back. They're just sort of really focused on what's happening right now. It reminds me of when I was in child welfare and somebody would get, there would be a change in caseworkers and the new person, I hate the word case, family service worker. People are not cases, they're people. A new family service worker, and they would start with where they were. And I'm like, have you gone back? Do you know what? Well, no, I just started. I mean, I went back, a couple weeks, couple months, but focused on what's happening now and taking care of, fires may be burning and I need to put those out. Well, yes, but then you also need to take time to look at what's gone on before. So you're not, right, having that full picture, looking at if I am looking at this and I'm wanting to understand what's going on, I'm not going to just look at what's happening now. I'm going to look to see, does he have any other arrest records? Have there been other charges? Do we know if he's been involved in any other relationships? Can we find that out? Do we know if there's anything else going on in his world? How's he doing at work in other spaces and places in his world? What do relatives say about him? And how does he treat women generally? Is this a women thing or is it just something here? What's going on? What do I know really about his pattern of abuse and how that has shown up just all the way around? We do this because there is such strong interconnectivity between his behaviors and child safety and well-being. They are linked. And if we're not fully understanding his behavior, we're not doing what we need to do to really keep a child safe, which is why we have children end up in situations where mom gets to stay in the house. Mom, who has been charged by dad with a gun, stays in a house 1 week with her children who have witnessed the abuse, and dad gets to stay in the house the next week. And things like that happen all over the state. Or children get returned to a parent who abused them. It also, right, this perpetrator pattern, the focus on the perpetrator's pattern of coercive, controlling behavior also highlights his choice, his decision, his choice to be violent, abusive, and controlling as parenting choices. Those are parenting choices. And I don't care if you weren't aware that that's what you were doing. That is, in fact, what you did. You made a parenting choice. You made a choice as a parent to expose your children to a pattern of abuse in your home. You did that. Do you see how sort of I'm just curious about your, and we don't have a lot of time, and I have one more thing, but I'm just curious about your thoughts about how you see this sort of that framework for understanding what's happening in a domestic violence relationship, how you see that changing, how, what effect, if any, do you think an understanding like this can have on practice? Anyone?
I think it would be a major is an understatement. It would be an enormous change, which also is an understatement. But we even deal with courts that you're talking about the history of, and they're like, we're not worried about that. We're here for this charge today. And this time she did this. So I think the more we delve into this program and the more we learn and the more we engage and the more we explain our job to DCS and what trauma is and how that affects the non-offending parent, and they carry that with them to court, it can change outcomes in court, and that's huge. Huge. And that can change life outcomes for mom and family.
Anyone else?
I think it'll give us the opportunity to really hold DCS accountable to looking at the situations in context and really taking that look at the whole situation and not just focusing on mom's current situation as far as mental health and even possible substance abuse that have just been something that has resulted from. I mean, even though I do realize she will be, held accountable to her actions, but also just given some context for the behavior.
And let's be clear, right? There's nothing about this. Note that what is documented in that consultation note is not just mom's protective factors, right? Things that she did despite what he was doing. And notice that what he was doing comes first, right? It comes first in that note. His coercive controlling behaviors come first because it sets the stage for what you're going to see that mom's doing. And you have the protective behaviors that mom engaged in while all that stuff up there was going on. And you have the promotive behaviors that mom is engaging in to help her heal. She recognized, I have mental health problems. I need to address those. I have substance use problems. I need to address those. And she is taking the steps that she needs to take to address those. If she weren't doing that, that would be on the plan. Mom needs to do this, right? These are things you hold both parents accountable, right? But you also, that accountability recognizes that the reason we're all here to begin with, because one of the things when I did this training, I did it probably 5 or 6 times, and I did the whole training, and I had it was a mix of child welfare professionals and domestic violence advocates, and it was wonderful. I loved it. It was just a great exchange. People learned a lot from each other. But one of the things that came up from a child welfare side is like, well, it sounds like you're letting her off. I mean, all this stuff is going on, and here she is, drinking and got all these issues, and she's not doing that and didn't do this, and it's all very focused on what she didn't do. Again, very much sort of she is the mom after all. Why wasn't she doing more? She should have done more. She should have left. She shouldn't let this go on. And it's helping them again, sort of say, guys, that nobody is saying mom should not be held accountable for the things that mom needs to do to promote child safety, child stability, and child nurturance. And we have a choice. We can focus on what mom didn't do, which is just going to make mom feel even worse than she already does, because she's already been beaten down pretty badly by him and undermined. So we can help him out and continue with that. Or we can make a choice not to be coercive and controlling and abusive to mom. And we can recognize what her strengths were, what she was able to do, and then help her build on those. Now, if mom participated in abuse, that's a different story. That's a whole different story. We're talking about a non-offending caregiver here, right? Who is herself a victim of abuse. So we have to keep that front and center. And she was as much a victim of abuse as the kids were. And in that environment, what was she doing? What did she do in order to promote safety, stability, nurturance, well-being for her children? And that is sort of the focus on strengths. And that was what I wanted to talk with you about. We are out of time. We're at 1 o'clock, but just very, very quickly. And you will have these slides just to look right. We want to always be asking ourselves, what is the domestic violence survivor doing to promote child and family functioning in response to or in the context of the domestic violence perpetrator's behavior pattern? Again, which is why that came first. And so we're going to look at what mom's doing through that strengths lens. And we're going to look at what are some of the things she's doing for safety, right? What are the things she's doing to help the kids heal from trauma? What are the things she's doing to help promote stability and nurturance, despite all the stuff that's going on in their world, right? And in the booklet that I gave you, there are just a number of different examples that you can look at to help provide some context for it's one thing to say take a strengths lens. It's another thing to say, what does that look like? Right? In actual practice, what does that look like? But basically you want to always ask yourself, right? What else, whenever a worker is talking with a family, with a non-offending caregiver, they should always be asking them, what did you do to promote, right? The physical questions that help them to know what she did to promote her children's physical and emotional safety. And we keep asking that, right? What did you do? What with Samantha? What did she do to promote physical and emotional safety of her children? Right? What did she do? What were the things she did to help them heal from trauma? If you ask her that question straight out, I don't know. She may not even be able to recognize it. But when she's telling you, when you ask her, so when he did this, where were the children? What did you do? How did you feel about that? What were some, right? When the children go to school, what does that look like, right? Who gets them up? Learning about the details of their day surfaces, right? How do you get food, right? I didn't ask her, do you go to a pantry? This is something that comes out through her story when I'm listening to her story about what happens, and I'm asking for details about her story. And that's how I find out these things. How she is helping her children heal from trauma, how she is helping to create a nurturing and stable environment for her children despite the chaos. And so this model, everyone, does offer a powerful roadmap that helps us to navigate the complexities of a family enmeshed in a domestic violence relationship. It also helps us to ensure child safety as we work through that, right? So this model, and I'm going to stop now, this model is one that I really wanted to familiarize you with. And as I said yesterday, This is an abridged version. I'm struggling to give you an abridged version because there's just so much to this. There is a great deal more. I'm happy to provide a much fuller version, but as I said, it takes a long time. So if anybody has time and is interested in spending several mornings a week, right? We can do a fuller version, or we can do the full version, which would literally take 2 weeks. Just let Jody know. And we'll find some time, maybe in February or March, to be able to do that. But this was the model that we initially were basing this practice on. That your role was initially based on this model. And the department fully embraced it, had people trained in it. I was trained in it and certified in it so that I could help provide that training. And then there was a problem with how things got charged that none of us knew about until after we went through the certification to become trainers. And then we learned anytime you train anybody in the full model, they have to be charged $150 per person. Even if so the department's like, what? No, we can't. No, we got our people certified so that they could do the training in-house. But you're saying we're going to do it in-house and we still have to pay you? Yeah, no. So that's why we have a separate model of practice, why we have a conceptual framework that talks about domestic violence responsive practice. They call it domestic violence proficient practice. For us, it's domestic violence responsive practice. And that's what you are promoting, right? It's what you will be modeling and what you are promoting. It's what the booklet that I gave to you yesterday that contains the conceptual framework that informs that model. And I will be, we'll be having a much shorter follow-up session where I will literally walk you through sort of your practice model. You've already got the pieces and parts of it. I'm pulling them all together so that you say this, okay, these are our activities, which you already have, your core activities. We talked about that the first day. Here are our core activities. Here are the outcomes that we want to achieve, that we are aiming to achieve. And you have that it's embedded in your booklet. And here's how we'll know. Here's how these things are linked. Here's the environment in which we're doing this. So that is coming too. So that we're all practicing sort of within that's it may look a little different from place to place because our communities are different. The cultures are different, our agencies are different, but we are operating within that same evidence-informed frame, following the same core activities towards this to achieve the same short-term and longer-term outcomes for children and families through our work with child welfare professionals and domestic violence professionals, bridging that gap between them. So more to come, guys. We're just getting started. We will have another meeting probably. I'm going to see, well, we'll be meeting individually and we'll talk with you. That's sort of what's being planned for the rest of this month. And for the first week of January, we should be, I think Jody probably has gotten meetings set up with everybody. So during that time, come with your questions. We'll be talking with you about sort of structuring sort of the practice within your particular agency, right? And addressing those needs and answering your specific questions about that. So, and then in January, we expect to have, for those who haven't had pre-service training, an abbreviated version of that with a focus on CPS investigations and family supportive services and prevention. And then depending on when that gets scheduled, we'll either have another session where we'll be talking specifically about our practice model, either before or after that. So a lot still to come. And we'll have regular, again, as I said, drop-in chat sessions. Jody will get those scheduled so that, you know, if nobody drops in, no problem. But, you know, they will be scheduled so that if things pop up, you need to chat, you want to talk, you need to debrief, then that will be available. And those will be at least once a week. There will be time for that. Okay. And of course, separate time can be scheduled anytime you want it. You just let Jody know. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day. I'm going to stop recording now.